I'm Cindy McCain, and I'm the chair of the Board of Trustees of the McCain Institute. I'm very honored today to have a good friend of mine join us, Nancy Pelosi. She, as you know, she is the Speaker of the House of Representatives and a continuous breaker of the glass ceilings. An extremely effective leader, respected and feared on both sides of the aisle. My husband, John, as you know, didn't always agree with her, but he always respected her. Madam Speaker, thank you so much for joining me today, and welcome to the Sedona Forum.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Cindy, my dear friend.
Thank you.
I'm very honored to receive the invitation to have a conversation with you today on subjects of patriotism for our country, respect for John McCain, and again, to be at ASU for all of this. President Crow is an admired leader throughout the country for academic entrepreneurship, thinking in new and different ways. I have family in Arizona, so we're well aware of his leadership and Sedona's pleasure.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Well, I do have some questions, not only about patriotism and leadership, but your leadership and much more. So I'd like to get started if possible. As you mentioned, you had known my husband for years, and even before you were the Speaker of the House. And the two of you didn't always agree on issues, but what was always allowed was that you would have a working relationship. I'd like you to comment on that and comment on your time, not just knowing him, but working with him, if you wouldn't mind.
No, I wouldn't mind. I'd be honored. Well, first of all, we have a loyalty. My son went to Episcopal High School, and Kane went to Episcopal High School. So shall we say we had a team spirit that went way back. As you said, we didn't always agree, but we had respect for each other's point of view. And that was at a time when bipartisanship was the norm. And of course, we had confidence in our own point of view, and you welcome the debate. So it was invigorating, in fact, rather than a negative, it was a positive. When I first, though, had my legislative work together with him, where we were on the same side, was on the McCain-Feingold legislation. When I became the whip in the early part of, 2002, just in the first month, he came to me and he said, I need this bill to get out of the House, and you're going to have to do it. Now, we were not in the majority at the time, but nonetheless, he figured that I was going to get that done. And more than you want to know on the subject, we had a discharge petition, all the rest of that. In any event, we prevailed. We got it done working together. And it was a wonderful thing for our country because it reduced the role of money, and which was really very important to our democracy. Very much in the spirit of John McCain, of patriotism, love of our democracy. But we had a lot of other things. I mean, we, apart from Episcopal and McCain-Feingold, the issues related to human rights in China early on in the 90s, we worked together. And then more recently, we worked on the leadership of Secretary Senator Dole, any title she has, with the Hidden Heroes. Actually, the launch of it was in my office, and John was there for us to be launched by as co-chairs of this initiative to help the families of the wounded warriors, and that was led by Senator Secretary Dole, Elizabeth. And there are many other things as well that we could talk about, but whether it was valuing our veterans and our country and valuing our democracy, or team spirit or Episcopal High School, honoring our values and human rights and the China issue and others, was a pleasure to work with him.
Thank you. Thank you. I know we miss his voice. I certainly do. I don't think I'm alone on that one. One of the things I wanted to ask you, let me remind you of something. I'm sure you heard this, but I remember Senator Feingold telling me one time that many people thought that his first name was McCain, McCain Feingold. And so he ran around having to correct people on what his actual first name was. It wasn't McCain for years. I loved hearing that story.
That's the way it is with legislation.
I know. I know. I know this year's theme of the forum is defending democracy, as you mentioned, and you were on Capitol Hill on January 6th when the attack occurred. One thing I'd like to know from you is what it was like to return to the floor of the House that evening after the insurrection, and why it was so important to return that night. We all watched, me crying and watching the whole thing at home, but we watched with great anticipation to see what would happen. And your leadership was very instrumental that night.
Well, I thank you for the question, Cindy. It really was a horrible occasion when there was an insurrection incited by the President of the United States. That's just the way it was. And that when the security came to me and just pulled me off the podium, I was presiding, I thought it was just a caution. I did not realize it was a necessity. Yeah. And we went to an undisclosed location, as you know, and saw what was happening, the Capitol of the United States, this temple of democracy, place where so many wonderful people had served the history of our country, to be vandalized in the way that it was. The worse the vandalism got, the more definite it was that we had to go back that night. Yeah. There were those who said, well, let's bring everybody over to the undisclosed location. I said, that's not going to happen. Really, to his credit, Mitch McConnell shared that view, Chuck Schumer shared that view as well. It was bipartisan that we would return to the Capitol. It was sad because, look, we are signed up for this. We are leaders in the party and we take the consequences. But for the members and for the staff and for the people that undergo this, it was pretty traumatic and it was very sad and so very necessary that we return to the podium in the House and the Senate, the podium in both places, and say, we're here and we are going to affect the election of the president, because this was not just any day. This was a day that was the day where we ascertain, we certify who will be president of the United States. And we did. Sadly about it, though, there were still those on the other side of the aisle in the House who overwhelmingly on their side voted not to accept the result of the election, which was sad. But the fact is, at the end of the day, we knew what would happen at the beginning of the day, that Joe Biden would be the president of the United States.
Yeah. Well, I know for many of us, it was, I was at home, I was watching with a dear friend of mine and in disbelief as to what was going on. And that moment when both the House and the Senate reconvened meant, as just a regular Joe out here in Arizona, that meant the world to us, because it reassured all of us that our democracy was safe and that our leaders were safe. And so I just want you to know that from a personal standpoint, it was very important and it was very meaningful for me to see what you all did and to begin and go back to what you were doing. It was so awful. Well, anyway, we all know how bad it was. It was awful. One of the questions I wanted to ask you also was, you're the first female Speaker of the House, and you had to overcome an awful lot to become the first and only Speaker of the House. I'd like to hear a little bit about your journey and how it relates to today's debate about inclusion and opportunities and underserved communities.
Well, I appreciate you asking that question. To finish off the previous, can you just imagine what John McCain would have been thinking that day?
Oh. We were all playing that game that day.
Well, we're all inspired by his courage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because one of the things, you know, there's certain things that we take as we're in the arena, but I'll never forgive them for what the trauma they caused for our staff, as well as
Yeah.
never forgive what the former president said about John McCain. You know, again, we had our agreements, we had our disagreements, but for the president to try to diminish the patriotism of John McCain was just like a deal breaker in terms of this person. It's outside the circle of any acceptable behavior. Okay, so I never, and I'm glad you asked this question, not because I like to talk about myself, but I want young women to know out there, you know, a long time ago when I was a young woman, I never had any intention of running for public office, none whatsoever. Now, I was raised in a political family. My father was mayor, my brother was mayor, almost my whole life. But I never had any interest in that. When I was a teenager in the 50s, rock and roll, Elvis Presley, that was it. I was ready for it to be normal. And in any case, we were taught that we had responsibilities to other people and that public service was a noble calling and we should help those who wanted to be engaged in it. Well, one thing and another, I get married, 5 children, whole thing. My husband's a San Franciscan. That's why from Baltimore to San Francisco. One thing and another, they come to me and ask me to run for Congress. I had no intention. I'm shy, really. I had no intent. I was chair of the Democratic Party of California, but that was advancing others. I was the behind the scenes person, volunteer. And in any event, to the young women who are there, I would say, just be ready. You just never know when the opportunity will present itself. Know why you would do it. Know what is your North Star? Is it the environment? Is it peace? Is it education? What is it? Your why, what you know about it, how you can get things done, thinking strategically, and how you connect with people. And that will make you a leader. And it's very necessary. Nothing is more important, is more wholesome for our politics and our government than the increased participation of women. So know your power, be ready. You never know.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. and we admire particularly the amount of women that you do have on your staff and the amount of women that are now being included not only in staff but in actual politics themselves and running for office, etc. I love to see that, and I'm just grateful that you're such an inspiration and a mentor to many of them.
We need, in other words, when I came, there were 23 women. Now we have 120. We have 100 more.
Isn't that wonderful? I know.
It's a decision to encourage women to run and to inspire, not inspire, but give them encouragement in order to do.
Right. Well, if we can move on to another question, if I may. One of the areas I'd like to highlight today is the glaring wage disparity between men and women. And I know you've worked very hard on this issue. Could you tell me a little more about the Paycheck Fairness Act and the measures you hope to accomplish in all of this?
The Paycheck Fairness Act is well overdue. You would have to wonder who, if anybody who has a mother, a sister, a daughter, a wife, would they be opposed to them receiving the same pay for the same work that a man does? The Paycheck Fairness, April 15th is a big day for us because that's the day Paycheck Fairness passed the House once again. I hope that it can pass the Senate. In the same, within a month of that time, we had already passed the Violence Against Women Act. We had passed the Equal Rights Amendment on the floor of the House. So just to kind of remove all obstacles to participation. But the Paycheck Fairness is a mystery to me because why would you not pay women the same for the same job?
Right.
It shouldn't be this struggle, and we're hoping that it will pass the Senate. I know it is supported by President Biden.
Well, I think Oh, go ahead, please.
No, it's
Please.
just remarkable that we have to make these kinds of fights. I mean, we also have a fight for equality. It's called the Equality Act, as end discrimination against
Right.
LGBTQ community in the workplace and housing and all the rest. So
Mhm.
it doesn't seem to,
Mhm.
you would think we wouldn't have to do these things, but we do.
Yes. Well, it creates so many opportunities for women and for families. These things do, and that's really what this is all about, in my opinion. Is just making sure that we can give a leg up to those who are struggling. So I appreciate your work on that. Lastly, I'd like to mention my husband was a proud Republican, as we know, and he believed in the bipartisan approaches to solve America's challenges, as he said so many times. Do you see a chance at all in Congress of bipartisanship, and how this, if we do or if we don't, how these issues affect China, the infrastructure, all the big issues is really what I'm asking about, but primarily bipartisanship.
Well, as you mentioned, John McCain was a proud Republican, and again, we respect people for being true to what they believe in. So it's
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
that's not to be a barrier. It is an opportunity, and I do think that we have a responsibility to find our common ground. Where we
Right.
can't, we have to stand our ground, but we must try, and we have to
Mhm.
try in a bipartisan way. Issues like China, I worked with John on China going back into the
Right.
90s, well
Right.
into earlier
Yeah.
90s
Yeah.
on the China issue. Infrastructure has never been a partisan issue. It's always been something bipartisan.
Mhm.
It's about the
Mhm.
communities in which we live, whether it's the safety of bridges, the access to transportation, whether now it's broadband, it's
Mhm.
water, it's so many things
Yeah.
that people need. And so in the country, it is not partisan. People
Yeah.
know what they need, and what we give, shall we say, value to is when the community comes together around an issue in a nonpartisan way. That's a that's a gold star for choosing a
Mhm.
project. I'm hopeful that we can do that. Now, we do know that in a history of our country, presidents have recognized that we've needed bold action on infrastructure. Thomas Jefferson had the first infrastructure. It was called the Gallatin. He was the Secretary of Treasury. The Gallatin Project. The country was growing. Lincoln,
Mhm.
Lewis and Clark, Louisiana Purchase, and this was built the Cumberland Road, the Erie Canal, things that
Mhm.
into the country that unified the country.
Mhm.
100 years later, Teddy Roosevelt, his infrastructure anniversary uh,
Right.
initiative was the National Park Service.
Right. Yeah.
Imagine.
Yeah.
And then President Eisenhower, in a time when the economy was not great,
Right.
insisted on the interstate highway system, which was to unify the country for security purposes. It was transportation, it was convenience, but it was for
Mhm.
security, and it was a
Mhm.
big deal. There,
Mhm.
Al Gore's father was the person who introduced the bill in
Yeah.
the United States Senate. It was bipartisan. So now we have big needs. Anybody has a home knows the most expensive maintenance is no maintenance, and the
Right.
bridges are in need of repair and the
Right.
rest. So I think that in the country there will be strong bipartisanship,
Mhm.
hopefully in the Congress. But let us try to find the conversation. Electrification, if we're going to have electric cars, people
Mhm.
know you have to have distribution. So
Right.
it's a practical matter. Beyond that, in terms of values, as you mentioned,
Yes.
China, I think we should be able to find that shouldn't be partisan in any way.
Mhm.
That should be as nonpartisan as anything. It's about
Mhm.
everything. We've seen each other at the Munich Security Conference the last year.
Right.
You
Yeah.
presented the McCain Awards. That was so beautiful. But John has been, and you have both have been so central to that, where people come together to find their common ground because security is our responsibility. We take
Mhm.
oaths to protect and defend.
Right.
Constitution, the American people. So security, economics, governance, all of these things come into the category of our relationship with any country, and certainly China. I've been fighting with China for over 30 years on human rights, but I've also been working with them in the past on climate issues. So, in other words, you try to find a place where you can come together because the world needs as much cooperation as we can get. But from a security standpoint, again, we have to make important judgments. And from a value standpoint, as I have said, if we refuse to criticize China's human rights violations because of economic reasons, then we lose all more authority to talk about human rights any place in the world. But I think that's a place, in my service in Congress, it's always been bipartisan. The Republicans have always been in the lead on that, and they continue to be.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate those words, because for those of us who live in the West, I know you do too, the growth has been phenomenal, but the lack of infrastructure, maintenance, all the things that you just mentioned have been dismal. And so we all look forward. I look forward to new roads here. I'm getting very excited about some new roads out here, I'm hoping. But listen, I don't want to take any more of your time, but I just wanted to thank you so much. Also, as a final note, for your work on human trafficking. I know that you have been very involved in the issue. I know that you care very deeply about it, and I know the importance that it stands, not just for you, but for those of us who are that believe in human rights and believe in what's right about the human being and what's good for America. So I just wanted to thank you on behalf of those of us who work really hard on the issue for your work.
Well, let me thank you because you have really been a leader, a recognized leader in all of this, whether as chair of the Institute's Human Trafficking Advisory Council, a co-chair of the Governor's Council on this. And it's such a sad situation. But again, that you would make it a priority with your standing, the respect that you command, just elevates the issue to a place that gives people hope. Yes, we can do something about this, because you, as I said earlier about these women, you have a vision of what you want to accomplish. You know the issue. You have a plan to get something done, and you are drawing support to your efforts in a way that will make a difference. So I instead thank you for your leadership, and it's in keeping with Senator McCain and how he was on issues that related to torture and the rest. So it's about the dignity and worth of people. I just may close by saying I had the privilege of meeting his mother, Roberta, at the showing of the documentary.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.
So, how beautiful she is. And I said to her, as one who cares about our democracy, I want to thank you for how you raised your son to be such a great champion of democracy. John couldn't be there that day, but she was, and brother-in-law was there. I met him.
Yes, Joe.
Well, thank you for making him the person that he is, that we all admire. She said, actually, he did it himself.
She's very humble, because I know she did it. She's one tough woman. I loved her to death. I just loved her more than anything. I really did. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm so grateful that you would take time to join us at the Institute for our Sedona Forum. And next year, we hope to see everybody in person. But thank you so much, Speaker.
Thank you for your leadership, for your patriotism, and for your hospitality today. I'm very honored by it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John McCain.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.